All right, welcome everybody to our Cultivating Healthy Plants for January, starting off a new year. My name is Carrie Jensen, and I'm from the University of Nevada-Reno Extension, and I am the Pesticide Safety and Integrated Pest Management Program Coordinator for the state. And my background's in environmental science, as well as consulting and landscape architecture. And I've been at the extension now for about 3.5 years. So I'm really excited today to be here and to teach you about a very fun topic, which is attracting beneficial insects to your garden. So this is kind of an intro to that topic. Just to start off with, this is what we're going to talk about, the agenda today. We're going to be talking about insects, like a little introduction, just to make sure. We'll go back to like the basics there. We'll look at why do we need insects? And then we'll see, I'll show you a bunch of different beneficial insects that are common ones. We won't cover every single one, of course, because there's so many, but some of the common ones you can be on the lookout for in your garden. And then we'll talk about how to attract those beneficial insects and support them in your garden. And of course, at the end, we'll go through review and questions. And as Mary mentioned, if you have questions, please put those in the Q&A box. It makes it easier for us to manage as we're going through the webinar, so they don't get lost in the chat. I will do some interactive questions where I'll ask you guys to put into the chat, but if you have questions for me, put them in the Q&A. And we will get to those at the end as we have time. Okay, so starting out with just a basic introduction to insects. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that insects are part of a larger group called arthropods. They are the largest group of animals. So we have the kingdom of Animalia, and then under that, the phyla of Arthropoda, which is the largest group in the animal kingdom. And arthropods, how you know how to classify them, some of their distinct characteristics is they have an exoskeleton, they have jointed legs, segmented body, bilateral symmetry. So if you put a mirror, they're the same on either side. And they have an open circulatory system. And today we're going to be looking at an order underneath that, or class, sorry, insects are a class underneath arthropods. And how we know insects or their distinguishing characteristics are that they have 6 joints, 6 jointed legs, 3 body segments, their head, thorax, and abdomen. They have compound eyes, antennae, and they usually have wings at one stage in their life, usually when they're adults. And I want you guys to guess what percentage of animals are insects. So this is where you can start putting stuff in the chat just for fun. What are your guys' guesses? What do you guys think? What's the percentage of insects of all the animals? I'm seeing 60, 70, 90. Okay, so people have a good idea that insects are a big percentage, and that is true. Insects make up 75% of all animals on Earth, and then you add the extra arthropods, that's almost everyone. So that gives you the statistics on the fact that arthropods are our biggest group, right? And of the arthropods, insects are the largest subgroup. And most people think of insects as pests or problems, but I want everybody to understand today that less than 1% of insects are actually harmful. So we have lots of beneficial ones that we're going to explore. And just a review so that people understand, insects can go through different life phases. There's either incomplete or complete metamorphosis. So really it's important to understand this, that insects don't always look the same throughout their whole life. Like when we're born, baby human, all the way through adult, we look relatively similar. There are some insects that go through what's called incomplete metamorphosis. That's kind of similar. They start from an egg, they hatch out, they look like a miniature version of the adult, and then they molt and get bigger each time through these nymphal stages until they make it to adult. And that's usually when they have their wings. But there are other insects that go through complete metamorphosis, and they start as an egg, then they're a larva or a caterpillar, and then they pupate and metamorphose inside there and come out as an adult. So their life cycle, they can look very different, right? They don't look the same depending on what phase of their life they're in. I also wanted to kind of point out that insects are in decline. You've probably seen this in the news and different publications, and headlines and things over the last decade or so. Entomologists are really concerned. And as a general trend, the data that I'm looking at here, this graph shows you, this was a compilation of monitoring data of 452 species and showed that there was a 45% decline in invertebrate populations over 40 years for those 452 species. So the orange line is Lepidoptera, or moths and butterflies, and then the red line were all other invertebrates in this conglomerate study where they combined all of this monitoring data. So just to give you an idea that it looks like insects across the board are not every single species, but as a general trend in decline, and that is of great concern to entomologists or bug scientists, insect scientists. So why do we need insects, right? Like maybe people are like, oh, they're in decline. Great, I don't like bugs, but we do need them for many different reasons. So the first is that they provide us with sanitation services. They're like our garbage disposals. Here we've got a dung beetle that's cleaning up poop, essentially. Really important. We need those services throughout our ecological systems to clean up the trash. And they're good decomposers. And this is one of my favorite decomposers. Another activity for the chat here. Does anybody have a guess what this insect is? Have you seen it before? And I'll give you another clue. This is what it looked like in its larva and pupa stages. You might have come across it before in your compost bin. Yeah, somebody got it. Soldier fly. Yes, they're one of my favorites. So the adult soldier fly doesn't even have mouth parts. They live very short lives as adults, and they have these kind of like iridescent blue wings. They're really pretty fly, actually. But when they're in their larval stage, where you might find them in your compost bin, they are voracious eaters, and they will decompose large and at the end of this presentation, I have a couple of extra credit videos or extra stuff you guys can watch. One of those is about soldier flies. So keep on the lookout at the very end of the presentation. I'll give you guys some links for some extra stuff to watch that I didn't have time to insert. But some other things or reasons we need insects is that they support our food chains. So if you're a bird fan out there, all my birders, you really need insects in order to feed baby birds. You probably know that, but baby birds need insects. They need high protein diets. So they don't eat seeds and berries when they're babies. They need the insects, and particularly caterpillars. And not just birds, but our larger food chains are all supported by these lower invertebrates, and insects are important for that. We also need insects, or have benefited from them, from natural materials that they. So some little tidbits for like history in case you guys need some fun facts for the day. So original records are made from shellac, which is a material that comes from an insect, the shellac bug. It's a natural resin. So if you think about it, we wouldn't have the original recordings of artists like Louis Armstrong if we hadn't had shellac to make the first records. Another material that historically has been very important and comes from an insect is carmine red dye. So this one is from a scale insect that is host on a prickly pear. So, and you can think about like if you've, the redcoats, the British redcoats, their uniforms were that deep red color that came from this red carmine dye, and that dye is still used today. Insects also, pretty obvious, most people know about this one, provide pollination services. It's really important for providing our food. Many of our fruits need pollinators, including watermelon. And one of my favorites to point out to people is chocolate. If we didn't have pollinators, we would not have chocolate, and that would be a very bad day. So we need to protect our pollinators, and they provide such a good service to us, of course, for our food production. And then to main topic we're talking about today, like why we need insects, is because they are great at controlling other insects. So this is part of integrated pest management, as this series talks about all kinds of topics under integrated pest management. Just want to bring up our triangle here that shows our tools that we use in IPM, or integrated pest management. And the major one we're looking at today is biological controls, which is using one species to control another. So we're using predatory insects to control other insects that might be feeding on our plants, essentially. So now that we understand why insects are important, let's talk about how to identify some of the common beneficial insects you might find in your garden. Because in integrated pest management, or IPM, our first step is always to identify the pest. And really to ask ourselves the question, is it a pest, right? When people, I think, look at their plant and they find on there, they instantly think, oh, it could be bad, right? But it could also be beneficial. So it's really important to figure out what you're looking at before you just assume it's a pest. Today, we have these fun things called smartphones that have all kinds of apps that you can download that are really helpful for IDing insects and things that might be on your plants, or even the plant itself. Like, what plant am I looking at? What is the bug? If I can get a good picture, I can upload it. I particularly like the app iNaturalist because it doesn't just use AI or artificial intelligence to try to figure out from the picture, but it also uploads it so that citizen scientists as well as real scientists can verify from the pictures of what species you're looking at. So we have kind of dual identification methods there. So I like to use iNaturalist as a good starting point to figure out what it is I'm looking at potentially. You can also bring in samples and photos to your master gardener desk, help desk, or your extension office. They may have services to help you identify. And if from there they don't know, it usually goes up to the Department of Agriculture, specifically if you're looking at something you really do think is a pest. And so I also like to play games. We'll play this little one. Once again, you can just do it in the chat. This is not mandatory, but we're going to play friend or foe, just to point out that it's really important to figure out, is this a pest or not? So what do you guys think about this one? Is this a friend or a foe? Different friend, foe. People aren't quite sure. This one is a friend. This one is a swallowtail butterfly. So while as a caterpillar, they do host on like parsley family plants, they are generally considered beneficial because as an adult, they are a beautiful butterfly that's a pollinator. And they don't usually damage the crop in a part that you're going to eat. What about this caterpillar? What do you guys think? Friend or foe? More consensus here. Yeah, foe. Yeah, everybody knows this one. The tobacco hornworm or tomato hornworm is closely related. These guys attack our tomato plants, and so they're generally considered a pest in our garden if we find them. They do turn into a very beautiful sphinx moth, which is a pollinator, but yeah, they can create so much damage that they're considered a pest. What about this one? Friend or foe? Okay, yeah, good consensus. Most people know this one. This is a friend. But often when I present in general public stuff, people don't realize this is a ladybird or ladybug beetle larva. They eat more aphids in their larva stage than they do in the adult. So they are super great for the garden, but sometimes people see them and they don't realize that's a ladybug and it's beneficial. So how about this guy? Another larva. This one a friend or a foe? Yeah, foe. Okay, you guys are right. This one's the elm leaf beetle larva. And yeah, you can tell by the damage it's doing on that leaf. It's not great for that elm. So pest. Okay, so I hope I've made the point that it's important to identify what you're seeing first. Is it a pest before you just eradicate or try to control? And now I'm going to go through some of the common beneficial insects that you'll see in your garden. And we'll go through some of the different orders of insects, starting with beetles. So our favorite one to start with, right? The ladybird or the ladybird beetle. What do you guys think here? Which one of these is a ladybug? Getting a lot of A's. Yep. That is one of the most common ones people see, but technically these are all ladybugs or ladybird beetles. So there are many different types of ladybird beetles. I have 400 to 500 species in North America, I believe. So it's important to make sure that you may be looking at a beetle, you're not quite sure. It might be a ladybug. So check that out. Make sure that you understand that ladybugs or ladybird beetles are physically diverse. And there are some really common species, but there's many different types. And they are all generalist predators in their larva stage and their adults. As I mentioned before, they actually eat more in the larva stage than they do as adults. So those little guys that look like they might be a pest are the best ones to find. They prey on aphids, scales, mites, mealybugs, white flies, and also they overwinter as adults. So I don't know if you ever have had the chance to come across them, like in the forest. In the wintertime, they will congregate like a huge group of ladybugs all together, usually like under a stump or in the leaf litter, and there'll be a huge mass of them. They all like overwinter together in a big colony or group. So that's really fun to come across. And in the springtime, when it warms up, they disperse from that overwintering site and go out looking for food in different locations. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So like I mentioned before, it's important to know the different phases of life, especially if the insect goes through full metamorphosis. So the ladybug is one that starts as an egg, goes to that larva stage, then it will be a pupa, and then eventually an adult. And most people are just familiar with what the adult looks like. But if you want to have these guys in your garden, it's good to understand what they look like at each phase. Another beetle that's really beneficial is a rove beetle. These guys, the kind of easy way to distinguish them or know what you're looking at is these short wing covers. I'm not quite sure if you guys can see my cursor, but they have like little short wing covers that look like little shoulder blades. And also they sometimes will do this behavior where they curl their abdomen and kind of look like they're a scorpion, but they don't have a stinger. And they prey on decomposers such as bark beetles, slugs, snails, ants, and they catch prey with their sickle-shaped jaws. Another beetle to look for, especially if you're in the desert or southern areas of Nevada and Utah's blister beetles. There are over 300 species in North America, and they have kind of this wide shoulders to look for. Their larvae eat grasshopper eggs, which is really awesome. But as adults, they eat pollen. We'll talk about food sources later, but yeah. And they also do secrete a chemical that can be an irritant. That's why the name blister beetle. But as long as you're not touching them or bothering them, you're not going to get that chemical on you, and they can go about their business. And once they lay their eggs and larvae come out, they can help control your grasshoppers. Tiger beetles are another one to look for. They have these really skinny little legs and kind of a big body, big head, big protruding eyes. And those mandibles, man, if nothing else says predator, it should be that, right? So they're out there hunting for all kinds of different insects, and they use digestive juices that they kind of like spit out and partially digest their food before they eat it. We'll go into a lot of kind of gory details on how insects eat during this presentation, so sorry if you're eating your lunch, but it's kind of fun. And yeah, they are larvae and adults prey on many insects. So if you see these guys, keep them. Ground beetles are another one that are beneficial. They are nocturnal predators, so you probably won't see these out and about because they're only out at night. They hunt on the ground. They're another one that regurgitates their digestive juices out and softens their food before they eat it. And they're larvae and adults to prey on mites, snails, worms, slugs, caterpillars, all kinds of things. And I have a pretty fun story for this one, little IPM story time here. So once upon a time, I was sleeping soundly in my bed, and all of a sudden I felt something on my leg like bit me. And I, of course, like, throw off the covers and pull up and like look, and I've got this little tiny larva stuck to my leg who looked like this. This is not the actual individual, of course, because I didn't get a good photo in my hurry. But being somebody who is a fan of insects, I didn't just instantly squish it. I was like, oh, I got to figure out what this is. So I did a little bit of research in the middle of the night and suddenly realized, oh, this is just one of those brown beetles larvae. And I've never seen them in my garden before. So I was a little curious. Like, where could this guy have come from? And then I figured out the culprit was my dog Beasley. He is a voracious digger. Like, he loves to go in the backyard and dig. And I'm pretty sure he must have dug up this larva and put it in my sheets, which was very kind of him, because then I discovered I had a beneficial insect that I didn't even know was in my garden. So yeah. True bugs is the next class or order of insects, Hemiptera. There are predatory stink bugs. So most people think of stink bugs as a pest, right? But there is a subfamily that are predators. They will actually eat other stink bugs, as well as other things like caterpillars, lygus, bug nymphs. They all do have that kind of stinky odor, hence their name. But it's important if you find a stink bug to figure out, is it one of the predatory ones? Because you want to leave those. So don't just instantly get rid of all stink bugs. Some of them are good. Minute pirate bugs are another really beneficial. They're, hence the name, minute, very tiny, only 2 to 5 millimeters long. They're a very common predator, and they prey on all kinds of things: thrips, spider mites, aphids, scale, whitefly, leafhopper nymphs, etc. And they overwinter as adults. So sometimes you might have to get out a hand lens, because you can see in this photo, that's an aphid. The minute pirate bug is not much bigger than the little aphid. So you might need to get out hand lens to look and see if those guys are crawling around among the aphids. Assassin bugs, these ones are really cool. They have that elongated head, narrow neck, and really long legs. They have sharp dagger-like mouth parts that tuck under their body and inject toxins and liquefy their prey so they can slurp it up like a Slurpee. They prey on hornworms, so really important. Everybody knew that one was a pest, right? So hopefully you find assassin bugs to help take care of those. Leafhoppers, aphids, and others. Damsel bugs, these guys have that really small head and stilt legs and kind of like little raptor front legs. Sword-like mouth parts that stab their prey and suck them out. They prey on insect eggs, aphids, caterpillars, cabbage worms, and they overwinter as adults. Big-eyed bugs, I like these ones. They're kind of cool looking. They have that very distinct broad head and wide-set eyes. They're a generalist predator when they're in their nymph stage, so they don't go through complete metamorphosis. They're just the smaller ones that get bigger and bigger. But throughout those different molts, they eat all kinds of things. 67 different species, apparently. And they have special mouth parts that suck out their prey's internal organs. So, fun fact about that one. Next grouping, we have flies, or Diptera, the syrphid fly. These guys look similar to bees. However, they can hover. So they're commonly also called hover flies. And as adults, they feed on pollen and nectar and are good pollinators. So you want them for that. But their larvae also prey on soft-bodied insects. And even though they look like a bee, they can't sting or bite. So this is what the larva looks like here. You guys can see this guy hiding among the aphids. Once again, might have to get out a hand lens. That is beneficial. And just wanted to reiterate again, this is from Joe Wilson, who presented earlier this year for this webinar series. He graciously helped share some of his photos and slides, but just to emphasize the difference between a fly and a bee again, you want to look at their head particularly. Look them in the eye. If they've got really short antenna and big eyes, it's probably a fly. And the longer antenna and smaller eyes, that is a bee. And their wings are different. There's 2 versus 4, but that's hard to count because when they land, when you can actually do that, they fold them up, so it's hard to tell. So just look them in the eye. If they've got that really short antenna and big eyes, it's probably a fly. And that hover behavior too, like if it's hovering in the air, bees can't do that, but the hoverfly can. Tachnid fly, another really beneficial fly with, they look like houseflies, but they're hairier, bristlier. They feed on pollen and nectar as adults, but they are parasitoids. So they lay their eggs inside a caterpillar, which then eats the caterpillar from the inside. We'll talk some more about some other parasitoids. There are a lot of parasitic wasps. They're very tiny usually, so they're kind of like these unsung heroes in the garden that you never see because they're so tiny. And they, instead of having a stinger, they have an ovipositor, where they lay eggs into a host, and then their larvae feed on that host from the inside out usually. And they attack all kinds of different insects. So one of the most common ones you might see, this is a tomato hornworm. If you see these little white egg cases, well, they're the pupa. So they laid their eggs, the eggs grew inside, and then they pupated and are growing in here, and the adults will hatch out. And of course, this poor caterpillar is done for. But you might not think of it as a poor caterpillar if it's a tomato hornworm that's attacking your plants. So if you find a tomato hornworm with these guys on it, leave it, because you have a whole army that is going to hatch out and take care of your tomato hornworms. And I have a video to show you this process too. At the end, I'll send you the link. You can watch that for fun. But it is lunchtime, and yeah, you might not want to watch it while you're eating. There's also other signs to look for parasitic wasps. If you find aphids that have these little holes in them, the aphid mummies, this is where a wasp has emerged from them. So it's a sign that they are about, even if you're not seeing them. And you might not want to apply like a general broad spectrum pesticide when you're seeing this, because the wasps might be about and you don't know that they're there, or you haven't noticed them until you see this. So if you do see it, they're probably about. Other beneficial insects, I'm going to run through a couple of other ones that don't fit into those larger orders. So there's lacewings. They have the big curved antenna. They're pretty distinct looking. So most people recognize these guys because of their lacy wings. They're generalist predators, both as larvae and as adults. They prey on aphids, scales, mites, mealybugs, whiteflies, and their eggs are suspended on silk. So there's another video that I will send the link to at the end where you can watch where they lay their eggs. So if you see this little silk thread with an egg on the end of it, it's probably lacewing eggs. They're really cool. And this is what the larvae look like. And yeah, voracious eaters. Snake flies are related to lacewings. They also have those lacy wings and this long neck, kind of a funny looking, distinct. Once you've seen them, you'll recognize them. They are native to North America, but only in the western states. So here in the Intermountain West, you'll see them. I find them commonly in my fruit trees. They are live in the leaf litter and under bark, and they prey on aphids, soft-bodied insects, and wood-eating insects. And then the top daddy of predators in your garden, the praying mantids. There's 20 species or so in North America. They're generalist ambush predators, as most people know. I have another video that you can watch at the end of them hunting, which is really fascinating. They consume everything they catch. They're just really good predators. They can swivel their heads 180 degrees, pretty cool. And they overwinter in an egg case. So if you find those cases of eggs, you don't want to disturb them, because then you'll have your little army of praying mantids that come out in the spring. I also wanted to mention arachnids or spiders. Even though they're not insects, they have 8 legs and no antenna. And they do include predatory mites as well as spiders. But they are the most important predators on the planet when it comes to controlling insects. So not only do we have beneficial predatory insects that eat other insects, but the spiders, they're the real guys that do biological control in your garden. A way to kind of quantify this, they estimate that spiders annually eat between 400 and 800 million tons of insects and other invertebrates. You're like, what does that mean? It's essentially they eat more meat than humans consume. That's more pounds than we eat of meat and fish across the planet. So spiders eat a lot of invertebrates, and they play a really important role in keeping insect populations under control. Okay, so we've gone through some basic species to look for. Now let's talk about how do you attract them and support them in your garden. I wanted to talk a little bit about augmentation. and importation of species. So the idea of, oh, I need beneficial insects. Maybe I should go get some and bring them to my garden. This is kind of a common practice. Like you'll see advertisements at nurseries and stuff for ladybug releases, for example, to augment into your garden. And I don't actually recommend this practice because usually the species that they're collecting, these are the convergent ladybird beetles, and they collect them usually from the wild and then bring them in. So that disturbs natural populations, right? If we're collecting from the wild to bring into your garden. Also, when you put them into confined spaces like this, there's more potential for disease to spread within their populations, which is not good for the overall health of this species. And I mentioned in the beginning, right, that they overwinter in large groups, and as soon as you release them in the spring or it warms up, well, what is their inclination? They want to migrate, right? So they want to go somewhere else. So as soon as you take them out of this nice warm container and open it up in your garden, their first instinct is to disperse and go find a new place for themselves. So they are probably not going to stay in your garden. So they don't really augment the population in your garden very specifically. So it's probably not a good use of money, time, and biologically not great for the species. Importation, this is a larger scale, like bringing one species from another part of the planet to control another pest in another part. This is done under high regulation with the Department of Agriculture. And if you're in an agricultural setting where you may have a serious invasive species issue where a biological control has been determined to be used, you would do that in conjunction with your Department of Agriculture. And it can go very awry if not done right. So that's why it's highly regulated. This is a picture of a cane toad in Australia. It's a good example of an imported species that went rogue. So it was brought into Australia just to control a pest within sugarcane, a larva that was causing problems there. And it decided, I like to eat not just that, but lots of other things. And now it's a big problem throughout Australia where this species has dispersed and eats many different things, not just what it was brought to control. So it's a cautionary tale of why that is highly regulated, and we don't encourage that. And it's only used under really highly regulated, where they experiment and make sure that the species they're bringing in only controls the one that we're trying to control and doesn't cause other impacts. And that usually takes many, many years of studies to determine. So rather than importing or augmenting, bringing in stuff, I suggest something else. So here's another activity for the chat. You guys can tell me, what is the name of this movie? And what is the famous line the character hears in the field? Yes, Field of Dreams. You got it. Okay. And build it and they will come. You guys are right. So I say the same thing for beneficial insects. Build it and they will come. You want to create the habitat rather than trying to go get them and bring them in. If you create a home for them, they will come to you. Put out the welcome mat, right? That's all you got to do. And you need to provide them with food, water, and shelter. So we're going to talk about all of those. So food, for beneficial insects, they need prey, pollen, and nectar. So we're going to talk about all three of those. First, to prey, that seems obvious, right? If we're trying to bring in predatory insects, they need prey to eat. So when we look on the larger food web, that means we need high numbers in the lower trophic levels to support the upper trophic levels. So if we're trying to support these predator arthropods, then we have to have all the things underneath them for them to eat, particularly the shredding arthropods or the things eating your plants. So this emphasizes that the second step in integrated pest management is to tolerate a certain level of pests. Sometimes we have to wait because we need to wait until there's enough food for the predators to come. And think about this, like ladybugs in the adult stage eat 50 aphids per day. This ground beetle eats its body weight every day. They eat a lot. And the hoverfly will lay its eggs, like how many they lay depends on how much food is available. So there has to be enough food to entice them. So you have to allow for a certain number of the shredder insects, the pests, to build up before the predators will come in. Another way that there's kind of like this delayed effect is with herbivore-induced plant volatiles. So we'll have a caterpillar that's like chewing on a plant. The plant will actually send out chemical signals into the air. I call it the bat signal. And then there will be carnivorous or predatory insects that get that signal and come in like Batman to attack the caterpillar. But this all takes time, right? It's not instantaneous. So sometimes you have to sit back and wait for these natural biological cycles to occur where we got enough predators or enough signals sent out by the plants, like help me, to get the predators to come in. It's also important to provide pollen because many of these beneficial insects, even though they prey on other insects, they also often eat pollen and nectar sources as well. And in addition to just having flowers with pollen and nectar, I also like to point out to people that there are extra floral nectaries. These are other parts of the plant that exude nectar, not commonly known about. And sometimes people think this is like a disease or a problem on their plant, but it's actually beneficial and they've built this in. This is an example. So American black cherry, it has these extra floral nectaries where it exudes nectar at a certain time of year, which attracts this ant. And those ants are predatory and will attack the eastern tent caterpillar. So they put out the sugar, the nectar, right before the tent caterpillars come out to bring in the predator to help protect them. So lots of plants have ways to help protect themselves and benefits to bring in the beneficials. So just reemphasizing once again, prey, pollen, and nectar. You have to have all of those in your garden to bring in the beneficials. Another little activity for you guys here, this should be pretty easy. Which one of these pictures provides more of those food sources for beneficial insects? 1 or 2? 1, the typical suburban home, or this one? Yeah, pretty obvious, right? 2. So that's what we're going for. We want to have more resources in our gardens to provide, and it really starts with the plant. So we'll talk through some guidelines for what kind of plants to bring in beneficial insects. The most important thing is diversity. So just having a wide range of different types of plants, and this could be in a residential setting or even in agricultural settings, having hedgerows, for example, that have blooming different types of plants to attract beneficials as well. But the more different types of plants and resources, the more variety of insects you're going to bring in. It's also important to have things flowering throughout the entire growing season to the extent feasible. It's really important for pollinators, but all the beneficial insects, right? We talked about that they need pollen and nectar too. So having flowering things at all times of year is important. So trying to time that in your garden so there's always something in bloom, except for in the dead of winter, of course, right? But as early in spring and as far into fall as you can get it. Also, planting plants in clusters or groupings of one species is helpful for insects to conserve energy. I show the picture of the bee here. I often in pollinator classes call this the bee buffet, right? They want to be able to just fill up their plate really easily, just going from flower to flower to flower in one small location, rather than having to fly from here to there to there to get their food. So you can really help them and attract them by putting a big cluster of a certain type of plant in one spot. That is a signal to them like, hey, that's an easy place to get a lot of resources, so it attracts them. Exposed versus concealed nectaries is also important. So some flowers, their nectar and pollen is out and really easy to access. And then there are other flowers that are built so that the nectar and pollen is hidden away and really hard to get to. Both of these can be used in your garden, of course, but if you want to get a wider variety of insects, having the exposed or open nectaries will bring in more insects because more insects can access this. The concealed nectaries have specific pollinators or specific insects that may have adaptations to be able to access that pollen and nectar that's tricky to get to. So you can have those in your garden, but if you want lots of different beneficial insects, it's really better to go with more of the exposed nectar. And this is just to show different insects have different types of mouth parts, right? Like the fly sops up stuff. The honeybee has more hairy. The butterfly has their proboscis where they stick out. So they have different mouth parts. So having flowers that make it easy for all of those different mouth parts to access the pollen and nectar brings in more. So these include things like the parsley family, dill, cilantro, Queen Anne's lace, the sunflower family. These are really easy open nectaries to access, lots of pollen in one nectar in one place. This includes things like asters, blanket flower, chickweed, goldenrod, yarrow, rabbit brush. I know people are allergic to this one, but it blooms really late in the falls and provides a lot for beneficial insects at the end of the season. The knotweed family is another great one to consider. And I'm going through these pretty quickly, but these are generalizations, and I'll give you more resources at the end where you can get more specific lists as well. But generally, think about things with open nectaries, easy flower or easy to get to with the pollen and nectar. Sulfur buckwheat is a really great native to the West. Lots of beneficial insects use this guy. Red buckwheat, St. Catherine's lace, anything in the Eriogonum genus. And the common buckwheat that's used for like cover crops and such, that's also in the same family. You also want to provide water. You can do that easily with a shallow dish with pebbles in it so they can access without getting wings wet. And then providing shelter for beneficial insects that are overwintering. I talked about a lot of them overwinter, like the ladybugs in duff or under logs and such. So providing that overwintering habitat is really important. However, I would suggest that we be cautious with this in the Western United States because the whole leave the leaves, they are very flammable, and we have to be careful about where we leave flammable materials around our home for fire safety. So just do that with a little bit of caution. Don't always leave the leaves if it doesn't make sense from a fire safety standpoint. Also, leaving extra materials like open stems and resources for wildlife in the winter, rock walls, crannies, leave a little bit of open soil because most of our native bees actually burrow solitary bees in the ground. And then there's providing habitat for our cavity nesting bees, as well as other beneficial insects will nest in these guys too sometimes. Just make sure you don't do these as really huge hotels, make them smaller and clean them out on a regular basis. Okay, so we build it, we build the habitat. Now the second thing we need to do is to reduce our pesticide usage. And I apologize if the master gardeners who are from Nevada have seen this too many times, but I think it does make a pretty good point. So the bee says the food's okay, but I'm afraid I'll have to give you minus points for the seasoning. So my point here, right, is we can build all the habitat, but if we use pesticides indiscriminately across all of that, then we are undoing our work, right? That it's not beneficial. So let's go through pesticides a little bit. A pesticide is any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any. This is an umbrella term that includes insecticides, rodenticides, all those. The insecticides are really what we're looking at here, right? So we don't want to use too many of those if we want to protect our beneficial insects, because a lot of insecticides are broad spectrum in that they affect all insects. They're not specific to a certain species. So we have to be very careful about only using them when they're absolutely necessary, because it could also affect our beneficials, right? This is where integrated pest management comes in. That triangle, right, of our tools, we start at the bottom and then we go to the top for chemical treatment as our last resort. So we always use the steps from the bottom up. And if we need to choose one, we're going to choose the least toxic option. And of course, always read, understand, and follow the label. And the label also, when it comes to protecting pollinators and beneficial insects in general, there is this little advisory, the pollinator advisory box, which will have specific instructions to look at for minimizing your impact to those beneficial insects. All right. I also wanted to give you guys some additional resources because we've talked about a lot today, but it's just a beginner course, right? And in 45 minutes, we can only cover so much, but there's lots of stuff to be learned about this topic. There's some great resources from the Xerces Society in general. You can go to their website and get all kinds of stuff for invertebrate conservation and education. I like this one that talks about overwintering habitat and how to create that. And Utah State has a wonderful publication that's an overview of beneficial insects in Utah. So it will have more information about all the species that I just talked about, as well as many more. And there's also plant lists in there, like it'll recommend for certain insects if you're trying to attract them, which ones to look at. We looked at some of the basic groupings, right? But you can get more plant lists from this publication too. So just to review everything that we've talked about, make sure gone through it all. We talked about what are insects, a very basic biology intro in case we've forgotten, right? We talked about why insects are needed. They provide so many different services for us, from sanitation to different materials to pollination, as well as biological control. And we talked about some of the common beneficial insects that you'll find in your garden. So again, that was just an intro. You can go deep and learn about all of them. The important thing is to make sure that before you control, you figure out what it is you're looking at, right? Because more often than not, you're probably going to find out it's a beneficial that you didn't even know about. Like my ground beetle, I didn't even know existed until it showed up in my bed for my dog. And we also talked about how to attract and support these beneficial insects. One, through creating habitat, and two, through reducing our pesticide usage and using it responsibly. And of course, in all my classes, I always tell people you don't get off the hook, you have homework, right? You have a call to action, something you have to do after this class. So I want each of you to take something you learned today and teach it to somebody else or tell it to somebody else. Because if we have the ability to continue educating others, then we expand and more people learn about how to protect their beneficial insects and attract them to their garden. Okay, and we have about 10 minutes, perfect, for questions. I do have my contact info up here, and I think Mare's gonna put the survey in the chat for everybody, especially those who are looking for their pesticide applicator credits.
Yes,
and then
I put
will
that in
also
chat.
put in the chat after I mentioned a bunch of different